Hey, good day, everybody, and welcome to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we are on day 11, reading the classic work, Guide for the Perplexed by the great Jewish sage, the RAMBAM, Moses Maimonides, from about 830 years ago. This is a profound work, considered to be a number one rated Jewish philosophical book, and we hope that those of you who have been joining us regularly are enjoying this work. It is not the easiest to follow along, but it is just such a joy to hear what a sage such as the Rambam has to say. Shalom, Ashley G. Always glad to have you with us. Welcome, welcome. So for those of you that want to follow along, we've put a link here to a free edition, and you can get it in the PDF, HTML, or Kindle. And we are reading from the Kindle edition. And today, folks, we are on chapter 72, or page 4248 on the Kindle edition. But this is such a large book. We're not even 38% in, and it's day 11. I just thought we would tackle this book, this large voluminous book, because a lot of the books that we were reading, we were going through them in 6 days, and I thought, we need more materials. So, Toma, welcome. Shalom from London. Is that London, England, Toma, or is that London, Canada? But welcome anyways. Anyways, if you want to follow along, you can download that Kindle edition. I've put that link into the chat on Facebook and on YouTube, and you can download a Kindle edition and follow along, and the Kindle allows you to highlight notes and develop your own study materials. So, let's just dive right in, because it's we want to cover some ground today, and I've got a meeting after this class with Rabbi in Israel. So, let's go for it. So, chapter 72. Know that this universe, in its entirety, is nothing else but one individual being. That is to say, the uttermost heavenly sphere, together with all the included therein, is, as regards individuality, beyond all question, a single being like Said and Omar. I'm not sure who he's referencing there, but the variety of its substance, I mean the substances of that sphere and all its component parts, is like the variety of the substances of a human being, just as, example, Said is one individual consisting of various solid substances, such as flesh, bones, sinews, of various humors, and of various spiritual elements. In like manner, this sphere in its totality is composed of the celestial orbs, the four elements, and their combinations. There is no vacuum whatever therein, but the whole space is filled up with matter. Its center is occupied by the earth. The earth is surrounded by water. Air encompasses the water. Fire envelops the air. And this, again, is enveloped by the fifth substance, quintessence. These substances form numerous spheres, one being enclosed with another, so that no intermediate empty space, no vacuum is left. So you got to understand that this is 830 years old, this book. That's definitely before Copernicus and the heliocentric model of the universe. One sphere surrounds and closely joins the other. All the spheres revolve with constant uniformity, without acceleration or retardation. That is to say, each sphere retains its individual nature as regards its velocity and the peculiarity of its motion. Talking about orbits, it does not move at one time quicker and another slower compared with each other. However, some of the spheres move with less, others with greater velocity. The outermost all-encompassing sphere revolves with the greatest speed. It completes its revolution in one day and causes everything to participate in its motion, just as every particle of a thing moves when the entire body is in motion. For existing beings stand in the same relation to that sphere as part of a thing stands to the whole. These spheres have not a common center. The center of some of them are identical with the center of the universe, while those of the rest are different from it. Some of the spheres have a motion independent of that of the whole universe, constantly revolving from east to west, while other spheres move from west to east. The stars contained in those spheres are part of their respective orbits. They are fixed in them and have no motion of their own, but participating in the motion of the spheres of which they are a part, they appear themselves to move. The entire substance of this revolving fifth element is unlike the substance of those bodies which consist of the other four elements and are enclosed by the fifth element. The number of these spheres encompassing the universe cannot possibly be less than 18. It may even be larger, but this is a matter for further investigation. It also remains an open question where there are spheres which, without moving round the center of the universe, have nevertheless a circular motion. Within that sphere, which is nearest to us, a substance is contained which is different from the substance of the fifth element. It first received four primary forms and then became in these four forms four kinds of matter: earth, water, air, fire. Each of the four elements occupies a certain position of its own assigned by its nature. It is not found in another place so long as no other but its own natural force acts upon it. It is a dead body. It has no life, no perception, no spontaneous motion, and remains at rest in its natural place. When moved from its place by some external force, it returns towards its natural place as soon as that force ceases to operate. This is before a lot of the heliocentric universe and the fundamental forces of physics that we understand today. Keep that in perspective, but don't lose intellectual virtue. Be honest and real with that which can be measured. For the elements have the property of moving back to their place in a straight line. I think this is like the basic conservation of energy principle. But they have no properties which could cause them to remain where they are or to move otherwise than in a straight line. The rectilinear motions of these four elements when returning to their original place are of two kinds: either centrifugal, the motion of the air and the fire, or centripetal, the motion of the earth and the water. And when the elements have reached their original place, they remain at rest. The spherical bodies, on the other hand, have life, possess a soul by which they move spontaneously. They have no properties by which they could at any time come to a state of rest in their perpetual rotations. They are not subject to any change except that of position. The question whether they are endowed with an intellect enabling them to comprehend cannot be solved without deep research. This is definitely foreign to us. Through the constant revolution of the fifth element, with all contained therein, the four elements are forced to move and to change their respective positions, so that the fire and air are driven into the water, and again these three elements enter the depth of the earth. Thus are the elements mixed together, and when they return to their respective places, parts of the earth, in quitting their places, move together with water, the air, and the fire. In this whole process, the elements act and react upon each other. The elements intermixed are then combined and form at first various kinds of vapors, afterwards the several kinds of minerals, every species of plant and many species of living beings according to the relative proportion of their constituent parts. All transient beings have their origin in elements into which they resolve when their existence comes to an end. The elements themselves are subject to being transformed from one into another. For although one substance is common to all, substance without form is in reality impossible, just as the physical form of these transient beings cannot exist without substance. I think he's trying to get across his current understanding of physics so long ago. Good morning, Patricia. I know in Texas it's probably closer to lunchtime, but I'm in the Pacific, so it's only 9:09 here in the morning. The formation and the dissolution of the elements together with the things composed of them and resolving into them follow each other in rotation. The changes of the finite substance in successively receiving one form after another may therefore be compared to the revolution of the sphere in space, when each part of the sphere periodically reappears in the same position. I've tried to study physics to a decent degree, and we know that the advances made definitely bring some clarity. But as I've constantly reinforced, got to keep intellectual virtue virtuous. Always be real and honest when you're talking about the things that exist. Don't ever come up from left field and try to claim things that you can't substantiate. As the human body consists both of principal organs and of other members which depend on them and cannot exist without the control of those organs, so does the universe consist both of principal parts, the quintessence, a quintessence which encompasses the four elements, and the other parts which are subordinate and require a leader, the four elements and the things composed of them. Again, the principal part in the human body, namely the heart, is in constant motion and is the source of every motion noticed in the body. It rules over the other members and communicates to them through its own pulsations the force required for their function. The outermost sphere, by its motion, rules in a similar way over the other parts of the universe and supplies all things with their special properties. Every motion in the universe has thus its origin in the motion of that sphere, and the soul of every animated being derives its origin from the soul of that same sphere. So, trying to understand this from a quantum physics standpoint, the best way I've been able to come to terms is oscillation. When you look at the momentum of, say, a satellite around, like our moon doesn't go directly around the pole or the equator. It's hung in its ellipse, locked in with the sun on a plane, and the Earth is rotated, and so you have the tidal lock and the effect on the Earth, which causes wobble on the Earth and Moon, and we see this in the Moon's wane. You can notice it visually if you follow the cycles of the Moon over its cycle. You can see the waning of the Moon, but this is what causes our tides here. But that, in essence, causes something oscillation, which is a squish between the poles, like a pumping. And I think they're trying to liken this. And so, I found myself, when I did all my research with magnetic anomalies, and you can find that in my film Fingerprint of the Flood. What I've found is that you try to understand, especially at the quantum level. I tried to write some math to do away with what they call the uncertainty principle. When you're dealing with subatomic particles, the uncertainty principle holds that you cannot measure their position and their speed at the same time. That even viewing it alters it, and so what's going on in that play? Trying to do away with it had to do with being able to see in a fourth dimension and understand antipodal lock in oscillation, and look at the universe in a sense of a quantum foam and the way interaction happens. Picture a bathtub filled with bubbles, and I don't want to get too arcane with physics, but in reality, I think what the RAMBAM's trying to promote is intellectual virtue. Even though he's using the physics of the day, he was considered to be quite a genius. He was a physician and ended up being a physician to a leader in Egypt. After he was chased, his family was chased out of Spain. So, okay, the forces with which, according to this explanation, are communicated by the spheres to the sublunary world are four in number. The force which affects the mixture and the composition of the elements, and which undoubtedly suffices to form the minerals. you get into the laws of gravity, and most people don't realize. I looked at gravity, and then you start to realize that when you're into quantum physics, they rely so much on what gravity is, but they don't realize that gravity only causes elliptical. If you look at spiral galaxies, they're only elliptical. So there's the tug elliptically, but what causes the spherization process and causes things to have depth, like flushing a toilet. You get your spin, but gravity functions in the spin cycle, but it doesn't do this north south. And there's an interactive process, I believe, between gravity and magnetism that work in tandem. Nonetheless, okay. The force which gives to each living being its vitality, I think there's a pulsation, and the force which endows rational beings with intellect. All this is affected through the action of the light and darkness, which are regulated by the position and the motion of the spheres around the earth. I don't know. He's trying to explain in common tongue his Kabbalistic understanding as well, which has its place, but this isn't it at this time. When, for one instance, the beating of the heart is interrupted, man dies, and all his motions and powers come to an end. In a like manner would the whole universe perish, and everything therein cease to exist if the spheres were to come to a standstill. And that it would be a physical reality if, gravity ceased. The living being as such is one through the action of its heart, although some parts of the body are devoid of the motion and sensation. Example, the bones, the cartilage, and similar parts. The same is the case with the entire universe. Although it includes many beings without motion and without life, it is a single being living through the motion of the sphere, which may be compared to the heart of an animated being. So I think, even I watched a documentary, a scientific documentary the other day, and they argued about the definition of life, especially when a lot of astrophysics were looking, what do they look for when they're looking in space? And they had to actually come down to what is the definition. And most scientists would just start to say that self-replicating motion. And, when you consider plants, I mean, the reason you give them sunlight is because it causes the heat, causes the pulling up of the water, the siphoning of the water out of the soil, allowing it to have a circulatory system and pass on the nutrients for growth. I don't know. You must therefore consider the entire globe as one individual being, which is endowed with life, motion, and a soul. This mode of considering the universe is, as will be explained, indispensable. That is to say, it is very useful for demonstrating the unity of Hashem. It also helps to elucidate the principle that he who is one has created only one being. Again, it is impossible that any of the members of the human body should exist by themselves. Yet that's the way most people feel, cut off and alone, not connected with the body, and at the same time should actually be organic parts of that body. That is to say that the liver should exist by itself, the heart by itself, or the flesh by itself. In like manner, it is impossible that one part of the universe should exist independently of the other parts in the existing order of the things as here considered. That the fire should exist without the cooperative coexistence of the earth, or the earth without the heaven, or the heaven without the earth. And I think that principle he's bringing out there is so true. The connectivity is there if you seek it and study it. But if you do, always try to look at it from the angle of what does this reveal of Hashem's complete and utter sovereignty? And where is that connection? And it'll help clarify the lens with which you're looking at the data. In man, there is a certain force which unites the members of the body, controls them, and gives to each of them what is required for the conservation of its condition and for the repulsion of injury. The physician distinctly call it the leading force in the body of the living being. Sometimes they call it nature. The universe likewise possesses a force which unites the several parts with each other, protects the species from destruction, maintains the individuals in each species as long as possible, and endows some individual beings with permanent existence. Whether this force operates through the medium of the spheres or otherwise remains an open question. So I think he's talking about the first principle of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy. Again, in the body of each individual, there are parts which are intended for a certain purpose, as the organs of nutrition for the preservation of the individual, and the organs of generation for the preservation of the species, the hands and eyes for administering to certain wants as to food, etc. There are also parts which in themselves are not intended for any purpose, but are mere accessories and adjuncts to the constitution of the other parts. The peculiar constitution of the organs, indispensable for the conservation of their particular form and for the performance of their primary functions, produces, whilst it serve its special purpose, according to the nature of the substance, other things such as the hair and the complexion of the body being mere accessories. They are not formed according to a fixed rule. Some are altogether absent in many individuals and vary considerably in others. This is not the case with the organs of the body. You'll never find that the liver of one person is 10 times larger than that of another person, but you may find a person without a beard or without hair on certain parts of the body, or with a beard 10 times longer than that of another man. Instances of this phenomenon, great variation as regards to hair and color, are not rare. The same differences occur in the constitution of the universe. Some species exist as an integral part of the whole system. So I think what he's trying to get across there is, I don't know if you've ever studied something called cymatics, but there is definitive fractal flow in the universe. If you're familiar with something called the Fibonacci spiral, most plants follow this Fibonacci spiral order in their growth. Even the branches of trees that branch out follow a programmed order, and this consistency. Yet, I still butt heads. I mean, Rabbi Kaufman is one who just can't stand the notion of evolution. He thinks it's a big lie, and he's always claiming that from a probability standpoint, that random change cannot account. There's not enough time to account for the growth of what is in existence. And from a random standpoint, yeah. But that is not the principal point, from my understanding, of survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest has to do with adaptation versus the opposition. And when you understand that Hashem built the universe with Midat Hadin, that is where the introduction of the opposition is. And there is more. Scientists, though, today have an aversion to cataclysm, yet it seems that Hashem created the laws of nature with indubitably cataclysm being a part of it. And survival of the fittest has to do with that which is prepared for. And when you look at it in incidences like the flood, you're talking an extinction class event, and yet Noah and his family were spared. And that's where the harakamim, midnat harakamim, the mercy side of Hashem comes in. And when you see it, its intervention for what it is, it's what salvation is. God saved Noah and his family. And if you look at evolution in that sense of survival of the fittest, is what God saved. in the sense that he carried it forward. You can actually embrace the notion that evolution is God guided, and the evidence doesn't. You don't have to be non-virtuous with the evidence. I've found too many. I've argued when I left Christianity. I argued with too many young Earth creationists. I found just embrace such intellectual flaws. They believe in a poof, genie-like creation. Failing to realize that they drag along the baggage that they have placed Hashem in a corporeal position underneath the tick-tock of a clock. And the Rambam's been crystal clear that is not, you can't do that concerning Hashem. So anyways, let's, strive for intellectual virtue and value the honesty of Torah and its integrity and purity. I hold that it's far truer than our minds can grasp in a lot of respects, and that there's room for growth, humanity, for long time to come if we keep the Torah in its rightful place. These are constant and followed a fixed law, though they vary as far as their nature permits. This variation is insignificant in quantity and quality. Other species do not serve any purpose. They are the mere result of the general nature of transient things. As example, the various insects which are generated in dunghills, the animals generated in rotten fruit or in fetid liquids, and worms generated in the intestine. You got to understand, even though he was a physician, this was pre-bacteria understanding. They didn't have pre-microscopes, pre-industrial revolution. In short, everything devoid of the power of the generation belongs to this class. There was actually a false notion way back when that believed in that flies and worms were generated in those mediums, when in reality we now know that a fly lands and seeds the maggots, and it's just so the etymology of things wasn't as clear. You got to realize this was written pre-printing press. You will therefore find that these things do not follow a fixed law, although their entire absence is just as impossible as the absence of the different complexions and the different kinds of hair amongst humans. In man, there are substances, the individual existence of which is permanent, and there are other substances which are only constant in the species, not in the individuals. The four humors. The same is the case in the universe. There are substances which are constant in individuals, such as the fifth element, which is constant in all its formations, and other substances which are constant in the species. As example, the four elements and all that is composed of them. I don't know. I think that's archaic understanding. The same forces which operate in the birth and the temporal existence of the human being operate also in his destruction and death. The truth holds good with regard to this whole transient world. The causes of production are at the same time the causes of destruction. This may be illustrated by the following example. If the four forces which are present in every being sustained by food, attraction, retention, digestion, and secretion, were like intelligent forces, able to confine themselves to what is necessary and to act at the proper time and within the proper limits, man would be exempt from those great sufferings and the numerous diseases to which he is exposed. Since, however, such is not the case, and since the forces perform their natural functions without thought and intelligence, without any consciousness of their action, they necessarily cause dangerous maladies and great pains, although they are the direct cause of the birth and the temporal existence of the human being. What I drew from a lot of this is coming to terms with the reality that, the aging process, decay is a part of this real world, and knowing the limits You see, I just, when I was in Christianity, saw a lot of people that would pray in vain to try to stop decay, as if Hashem would, suspend the entire laws of nature just for their whim. Yeah, the fact this fact is to be explained as follows: if the attractive force would absorb nothing but that which is absolutely beneficial and nothing but the quantity which is required, man would be free from many such sufferings and disorders. But such is not the case. The attractive force absorbs any humor that comes within the range of its action. Although such humor be ill adapted in quantity or in quantity, it is therefore natural that sometimes a humor is absorbed which is too warm, too cold, too thick, or too thin, or that too much humor is absorbed, and thus the veins are choked. Obstruction and decay ensue. The quality of that humor is deteriorated, its quantities altered, diseases are originated, such as scurvy, leprosy, abscess, or a dangerous illness such as cancer, um, elephantitis, gangrene, and at last the organ or organs are destroyed. The same is the case with every one of the four forces and with all existing beings, the same force that originates all things and causes them to exist for a certain time, namely the combination of the elements which are moved and penetrated by the forces of the heavenly spheres, that the same cause becomes throughout the world a source of calamities, such as devastating rain, showers, hailstorms, hail, hurricane, thunders, lightning, malaria, or other terrible catastrophes by which a place or many places or an entire country may be laid waste, such as landslips, earthquakes, meteoric showers, and floods issuing forth from the seas and from the interior of the earth. I think what he's trying to get across is still, once again, embracing intellectual virtue and understanding the laws of nature that are of nature, and know that Hashem rules over it all, um, but put it in its separate category in your mind and have peace that, Hashem knew every variable that led up to, say, an earthquake. Like I was chatting yesterday with some people in Kentucky, where they've recently had those huge tornadoes destroying entire towns. Just talking to friends, no-hide friends down there to make sure they're safe and everything's okay. These are things beyond human control, um, in general, but don't look at them as the mystics would look at it as signs and omens, and let imagination run wild, and that's where witch hunts and wickedness stem from the actions of man. And this is why you need to embrace the Sheva Mitzvot, hang on to the teaching of the rabbis, and learn to function to make the world a better place between you and Hashem and you and mankind. Yeah. Bear in mind, however, that in all that we have noticed about the similarity between the universe and the human being, nothing would warrant us to assert that man is a microcosm. For although the comparison in all its parts applies to the universe and all any living being in its normal state, we never heard that any ancient author called the donkey or the horse a microcosm. This attribute has been given to man alone on account of his peculiar faculty of thinking. I mean the intellect, the hylic intellect, which appertains to no other living being. This may be explained as follows. An animal does not require for its sustenance any plan, thought, or scheme. Each animal moves and acts by its nature, eats as much as it can find of sustainable things. It makes its resting place wherever it happens to be, cohabits with any mate it meets while in heat in the periods of its sexual excitement. In this manner does each individual conserve itself for a certain time and perpetuates the existence of its species without requiring for its maintenance the assistance or support of any of its fellow creatures. For all the things to which it has to attend, it performs by itself. With man, it is different. If any individual had a solitary existence and were like an animal left without guidance, he would soon perish. He would not endure even one day unless it were by mere chance, unless he happened to find something upon which he might feed. For the food which man requires for his substance demands much work and preparation, which can only be accomplished by reflection and by plan. Interesting concept, and the rabbis do teach that, bread is spoken of often in Torah and Tanakh because it is a combination of what Hashem gives, the grain, he provides the grain, and what we work with, grind it to flour and make it into bread. So it's a mixture of what Hashem gives and what we bring to the table. And, where bread is considered important in Torah and Tanakh because it includes the actions of both Hashem and humanity. Many vessels must be used, and many individuals, each in his particular work, must be employed. It is therefore necessary that one person should organize the work and direct men in such manner that they should properly cooperate and that they should assist each other. The protection from heat in summer and from winter and cold, and shelter from rain, snow, and wind require in the same manner the preparation of many things, none of which can properly be done without design and thought. For this reason, man has been endowed with intellectual faculties which enable him to think, consider, and act by various labors to prepare and procure for himself food, dwelling, and clothing, and to control every organ of his body, causing both the principal and secondary organs to perform their respective functions. Consequently, if a man, being deprived of his intellectual faculties, only possessed vitality, he would in a short time be lost. The intellect is the highest of all faculties of living creatures. It is very difficult to comprehend, and its true character cannot be understood as easily as man's other faculties. Interesting. So that is really, they teach what came to humanity when Hashem breathed into Adam the breath of life, and man became a living being, is what he's talking about. That intellect. Okay, there also exists in the universe a certain force which controls the whole, which sets in motion the chief and principal parts and gives them the motive power for governing the rest. Without that force, the existence of this sphere with its principal and secondary parts would be impossible. It is the source of the existence of the universe in all its parts. That force is Hashem. Blessed be his name. It is on account of this force that man is called microcosm, for he likewise possesses a certain principle which governs all the forces of his body, and on account of this comparison, Hashem is called the life of the universe. And he swore by the life of the universe from Daniel 7:7. Interesting. You must understand that in the parallel which we have drawn between the whole universe on the one hand and the individual man on the other, there is a complete harmony in all the points which we mentioned above. Only in the following 3 points a discrepancy may be noticed. First, the principal organ of any living being which has a heart derives a benefit from the organs under the control of the heart, and the benefits of the organs thus become the benefits of the heart. He's talking about the way the system functions, the supply of blood. This is not the case in the constitution of the universe. That part which bestows authority or distributes power does not receive in return any benefit from the things under its control. Whatever it grants is granted in the manner of a generous benefactor, not from any selfish motive, but from a natural generosity and kindness, only for the sake of imitating the ways of the Most High. Secondly, living creatures endowed with a heart have it within the body and in the midst thereof. There it is surrounded by organs which it governs. Thus it derives a benefit from them, for they guard and protect it, and they do not allow that any injury from without should approach it. The reverse occurs in the case of the universe. The superior part encompasses the inferior parts, it being certain that it cannot be affected by the action of any other being. And even if it could be affected, there is nobody without it that could affect it. While it influences all that is contained within, it is not influenced by any act or force of any material being. There is, however, some similarity between the universe and man in this point. In the body of animals, the organs more distant from the principal organs are of less importance than those nearer to it. Also in the universe, the nearer the parts are to the center, the greater is their turbidness, their solidity, their inertness, their dimness, and darkness. Postulated black holes even, 830 years ago. Amazing. Because they are further away from the loftiest elements, from the source of light and brightness, which moves by itself, and the substance of which is the most rarefied and simplest, from the outermost sphere. At the same ratio at which a body is nearer the sphere, it derives properties from it and rises above the spheres below it. Thirdly, the faculty of thinking is a force inherent in the body and is not separated from it. But God is not a force inherent in the body of the universe, but is separate from all its parts. How God rules the universe and provides for it is a complete mystery. Man is unable to solve it. You can comprehend portions, but unable to solve the whole of the matter. For on the one hand, it can be proved that God is separate from the universe and in no contact whatever with it, because contact requires corporeality. But on the other hand, his rule and providence can be proved to exist in all parts of the universe, even in the smallest. Praised be he whose perfection is above our comprehension. It is true that we might have compared the relation between God and the universe to the relation between the absolute acquired intellect and man. It is not a power inherent in the body, but a power which is absolute separate from the body and is from without brought into contact with the body. The rational faculty of man may be further compared to the intelligence of the spheres, which are, as it were, material bodies, but the intelligence of the spheres, purely spiritual beings, as well as man's absolute and acquired intellect, are subjects of deep study and research. The proof of their existence, though correct, is abstruse and includes arguments which present doubts are exposed to criticism and can be easily attacked by objectors. We have therefore preferred to illustrate the relation of Hashem to the universe by a simile which is clear and which will not be contradicted in any of the points which have been laid down by us without any qualification. The opposition can only emanate either from an ignorant man who contradicts truths even if they are perfectly obvious, just as a person unacquainted with geometry rejects elementary propositions which have been clearly demonstrated, or from the prejudiced man who deceives himself. Those, however, who wish to study the subject must persevere in their studies until they are convinced that all our observations are true, and until they understand that our account of this universe unquestionably agrees with the existing order of things. If man is willing to accept this theory from one who understands how to prove things which can be proved, let him accept it, and let him establish on it his arguments and proofs. If, on the other hand, he refuses to accept without proof even the foregoing principles, let him inquire for himself, and ultimately he will find that they are correct. Lo, this, we have searched it, so it is, hear it, and know thou it for thy good, from Job 5:27. After these preliminary remarks, we will treat of the subject which we promised to introduce and explain. And there we go. We made it to chapter 73. There are 12 propositions common to all the Muslims. However, different in their individual opinions and methods may be, the Muslims require them in order to establish their views on the four principles. I shall first enumerate these propositions and then discuss each separately, together with the inferences which may be drawn from them. Okay? Proposition 1, all things are composed of atoms. Proposition 2, there is a vacuum, meaning in space. Proposition 3, time is composed of time atoms, which, I'm skeptical of the notion. Proposition 4, substance cannot exist without numerous accidents. Proposition 5, each atom is completely furnished with the accidents which I will describe and cannot exist without them. Proposition 6, accidents do not continue in the existence during two-time atoms. See what he's talking about there. Both positive and negative properties have real existence and are accidents which owe their existence to some cause of efficiency. Proposition 8, all existing things, i.e., all creatures, consist of substance and of accidents, and the physical form of a thing is likewise an accident. I think when he's using the phrase accident, he's not saying it wasn't intended, but that there's cascading events beyond direct connection that are visible, that can be accounted. No accident can form the substratum for another accident. Proposition 10, the test for the possibility of an imagined object does not consist in its conformity with the existing laws of nature. I don't know about that. Proposition 11, the idea of the infinite is equally inadmissible whether the infinite be actual, potential, or accidental, i.e., there is no difference whether the infinite be formed by a number of coexisting things or by a series of things, of which one part comes into existence when another has ceased to exist, in which case it is called accidental infinite. In both cases, the infinite is rejected by the Muslims as fallacious. 12, the senses mislead and are in many cases inefficient. Their perceptions therefore cannot form the basis of any law or yield data for any proof. And that's a key point. And this is where the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, dupes many of us. We hold often and think that our senses, our perceptions, are true, and often things are far greater and grander than we can even envision or imagine. But the first proposition, the universe, that is, everything contained in it, is composed of very small parts or atoms, which are indivisible on account of their smallness. So now, even today, we understand that atoms are made up of quarks as subatomic particles and further still. But I think when he's saying atoms, he's talking about elementary particles. Such an atom has no magnitude, but when several atoms combine, the sum has a magnitude and thus forms a body. And we've learned this through atomic structure and chemistry, where they show the compounding attractions. And they usually, like when you consider what causes in the bloodstream that he talked about in the heart, I mean, it's the heme molecule in the blood that binds, the heme molecule contains the essential iron atom, which bonds with the oxygen, allowing the blood to carry the oxygen. So when you have the heme molecule in your blood, you need the iron in your blood in order to carry the oxygen to the rest of the body. That's why the whole heart pumps it, is so that the blood goes to the whole body, passing on the oxygen. And if therefore two atoms were joined together, each atom would become a body, and they would thus form two bodies, a theory which in fact has been proposed by some of the Muslims. You got to realize he's talking about at a time during the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and they had such grand scholars. Many of them were considered elite in the world. And he was chased out of Spain as the Ottoman Empire was expanding uh, into Europe, and found himself in Egypt and Jerusalem and in Egypt, as we read at the beginning of the book. All of these atoms are perfectly alike, and now we realize that we have the hydrogen, which has one proton, one electron, helium, which has two electrons, and so on and so forth. We've got the periodic table that starts to describe all that we understand today. But all of these atoms are perfectly alike if they're all consisted of the same number of combinations, is what he's talking about. They do not differ from each other at any point. The Muslims further assert that it is impossible to find a body that is not composed of such equal atoms which are placed side by side. According to this view, genesis and composition are identical. Destruction is the same as decomposition. So when the molecular bond breaks down, the atoms fall apart. That causes the decay. They do not use the term destruction, for they hold that genesis implies composition and decomposition, motion, and rest. These atoms, they believe, are not, as was supposed by Epicurus and other atomists, numerically constant, but are created anew whenever it pleases the creator. Their annihilation, therefore, is not impossible. Now I'll explain to you their opinion concerning the vacuum. Second position, on the vacuum, the original Muslims also believe that there is a vacuum, i.e., one space or several spaces which contain nothing, which are not occupied by anything whatsoever, and which are devoid of all substance. This proposition is to them an indispensable sequel to the first. For if the universe were full of such atoms, how could any of them move? For it is impossible to conceive that one atom should move into another, and yet the composition as well as the decomposition of all things can only be affected by the notion of atoms. Thus, the Muslims were compelled to assume a vacuum in order that the atoms may combine, separate, and move in that vacuum which does not contain anything or any atom. And there's a ton of theoretical physicists, and they look at trying to draw energy out of what it was a perceived vacuum, and in their the process of their research, they realize that there is in fact not a vacuum in space, but there is we know that there's radiation waves all throughout space, and yeah, there's they contain degrees of energy that may not be uh, particle. Um, Anyways, you start getting into particle and wave theory, and all kinds of other notions. But third proposition, time is composed of time atoms, of many parts on which, on account of their short duration, cannot be divided. This proposition is also the logical consequence of the first. The Muslims undoubtedly saw how Aristotle proved that time, space, and locomotion are of the same nature. That is to say, they can be divided into parts which stand in the same proportion to each other. If one of them is divided, the other is divided in the same proportion. They therefore knew that if time were continuous and divisible ad infinitum, their assumed atom of space would of necessity likewise be divisible. Similarly, if it were supposed that space is continuous, it would necessarily follow that the time element, which they considered to be indivisible, could also be divided. This has been shown by Aristotle in the treatise called Acroasis. Hence, they concluded that space was not continuous, but was composed of elements that could not be divided, and that time could likewise be reduced to time elements which were indivisible. I don't believe this is the case. I've come to understand that time itself is just simply, now we talk of space time, um, It's a byproduct of space in itself. It is measurement. To have space is to have distance, and that distance can, to be able to measure it, you have to have a ruler. Time is really only a standard of measurement. Um, and Yeah, so it's like when the Mars rover is up there in Mars, they use the statement of Sol, SOL, and they're talking about solar time, not how fast the Martian surface is spinning. Um, they're talking. It's like we here on Earth, we use the phrase of 24 hours in a day. That's just based on the rotation of the Earth. So I think it's nothing more than measurement, which is a byproduct of space itself, not an individual element for sure. An hour is divided into 60 minutes, the minute into 60 seconds, the second is 60 parts, and so on. At last, after 10 or more successive divisions by 60, time elements are obtained, which are not subjected to division and, in fact, are indivisible, just as is the case with space. Time would thus be an object of position and order. The Muslims did not at all understand the nature of time. This is a matter, of course, for if the greatest philosophers became embarrassed when they investigated the nature of time, if some of them were altogether unable to comprehend what time really was, and if even Galenus declared time to be something divine and incomprehensible, what can be expected of those who do not regard the nature of things? Now, mark what conclusions were drawn from these three propositions and were accepted by the Muslims as true. They held that locomotion consisted in the translation of each atom of a body from one point to the next one, according to the velocity of one body in motion cannot be greater than that of another body. When, nevertheless, two bodies are observed to move during the same time through different spaces, the cause of this difference is not attributed by them to the fact that the body which has moved through a larger distance had a greater velocity, but to the circumstance that motion, which in ordinary language is called slow, has been interrupted by more moments of rest, while the motion, which ordinarily is called quick, has been interrupted by fewer moments of rest. When it is shown that the motion of an arrow, which is shot from a powerful bow, is in contradiction to their theory, they declare that in this case, too, the motion is interrupted by moments of rest. Yeah. The imagination of man. They believe that it is the fault of man's senses if he believes that the arrow moves continuously, for there are many things which cannot be perceived by the senses, as they assert in the 12th position. But we ask them, have you observed a complete revolution of a millstone? Each point in the extreme circumference of the stone describes a large circle in the very same time in which a point nearer to the center describes a small circle. The velocity of the outer circle is therefore greater than that of the inner circle. You cannot say that the motion of the latter was interrupted by more moments of rest, for the whole moving body, i.e., the millstone, is one coherent body. They replied, during the circular motion, the parts of the millstone separate from each other, and the moments of rest interrupting the motion of the portions near the center are more than those which interrupt the motion of the outer portions. I found when studying some of these kind of notions is the way the Coriolis effect happens on the Earth, and the way, because of the spin of the rotation, the center of the equator is much further distance than the same rotational spin closer to the poles. So you have, because of motion and spin, you have the Coriolis effect kick in, because what's moving at, say, 40,000 kilometers an hour at the center, at the equator, if you go, say, 5,000 kilometers north, it's now gone down by several thousand kilometers, yet one revolution is still one revolution. And so you have torsion, and that torsion has effects on any spherical object in existence that has spin and rotation. And so I find the Muslims didn't comprehend a lot of that, but he's making a statement that when he's talking about the rolling around of a millstone, if the millstone's this thick, the inside circle is going to spin much closer than the outside, and it's not that something is interrupted, but it just goes to show you there's been crazy notions over the millennia that people had when it came to physics, and until measurements were standards were put into place to quantify, were we able to come to finer understandings. Okay. You cannot say that the motion of the latter was interrupted by more moments of rest for the whole body moving. The millstone is one coherent body. They reply, during the circular motion, the parts of the millstone separate from each. Okay, we don't want to. We read that already. We ask again, how is it that the millstone, which we perceive as one body and which cannot be easily broken, even with a hammer, resolves into its atoms when it moves and becomes again one coherent body, returning to its previous state as soon as it comes to rest? Torsion and the buildup of torsion, we see this is what happens with clouds, especially when you see cyclonic clouds and hurricanes and things that develop. That happens because of the Coriolis force, but one thing is affecting another. Again, the reply is based on the 12th proposition, which is to the effect that the perception of the senses cannot be trusted, and thus only the evidence of the intellect is admissible. Do not imagine that you have seen the foregoing example, the most absurd of the inferences which may be drawn from these three propositions. The proposition relating to the existence of a vacuum leads to more preposterous and extravagant conclusions. He's got a principal point there. Nor must you suppose that the aforegoing theory concerning motion is less irrational than the proposition resulting from this theory, that the diagonal of a square is equal to one of its sides. And some of the Muslims go so far as to declare that the square is not a thing of real existence. In short, the adoption of the first proposition would be tantamount to the rejection of all that has been proved in geometry. The propositions in geometry would, in this respect, be divided into two classes. Some would be absolutely rejected, those which relate to properties of the incommensurability and the commensurability of lines and planes, to rational and irrational lines, and all other propositions contained in the 10th book of the Elucid and in similar works. One thing I found is that geometry is something that has always been an integral part of Judaism. And if you look closely, some of their best sages were gemologists. And the gemologists had to understand geometrical structures in order to get perfect glint of light from stones that they were polishing or cutting. And if you've ever heard of a princess cut diamond, it's something different than say an oval. And so the planes are cut and shined distinctly to actually convey something. And I know that this goes all the way back to their ephod that the high priest would wear. Okay, and from my understanding, the high priest would wear an ephod that had the 12 stones on it. If you're familiar with the way that that's written in Tanakh, when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, glints in the stones is what the high priest would be able to interpret. And so that caused me to ponder and look at upper dimensional thinking or interaction, the way light glints through certain fractal forms, and if it could convey to the high priest messages, and there was even one verse in Tanakh, I think it was where Solomon or one of the kings said, "Bring me the ephod." In other words, it was used to decipher much. The point being that understanding proper geometry and where geometry um, can clash or actually interact in this world, I found that when you take the Magen David, the Star of David, the Jewish symbol for on their flag, it's like two triangles, two perfect triangles. One's upside down, but if you flesh out a triangle, you don't have a pyramid. Okay, that's your pyramid's got four sides on top and one on the bottom. What they would be if you look at them in lights of a tetrahedron, which only has four sides. Actually, the fourth dimension of a triangle is a tetrahedron. If you look at the Star of David as a double tetrahedron, okay, and understand the way centrifugal forces twist, um, I found that the double tetrahedron was the base root rule for spherization in the universe. And uh, when you put them together, the way the Star of David is, you actually have, because it's a odd number, you actually have a torsional drive um, in that spherization process. And I think that there's a connection between gravity and magnetism there that allows for the spherization process in the entire universe. That, if understood, would allow for a real paradigm shift or a leap in human understanding of the laws of physics, because you could begin to look at geometry a lot closer and find interactive. And I kind of was trying to adapt this from the notion, if you look at the old Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew writing versus Second Temple period, where the letters became very rigid and crisp to what it is today, the square version, considering fractal imagery in the medium of a geometric structure with light reflection, it might be visible for communicate. But then again, too, without knowing the what exactly the high priest looked for in the glint of the ephod, it's tough to say. But I think that there's a legitimate physical connection between an upper dimension there and where we sit today. That some useful ideology could be developed, to take humanity to a greater place. Furthermore, in the well-known book of Problems by the son of Shakir are contained more than 100 problems, are all solved and practically demonstrated. But if there really were a vacuum, not one of these problems could be solved, and in many of the waterworks described in that book could not have been constructed. The refutation of such proposition is a mere waste of time. I will now proceed to treat the other propositions mentioned above. The fourth proposition: the accidents of things have real existence. They are elements superadded to the substance itself, and no material thing can be without them. Had this proposition been left by the Muslims in this form, it would have been correct, simple, clear, and indisputable. They, however, have gone further, asserting that a substance which has not the attribute of life must necessarily have that of death, for it must always have one of the two contrasting properties. According to their opinion, color, taste, motion, or rest, combination or separation, etc., can be predicated of all substances, and if a substance have the attribute of life, it must at the same time possess such other kinds of accidents, of wisdom or folly, free will, or the reverse, power or weakness, perception, or any of its opposites. And in short, the substance must have the one or the other of all correlative accidents appertaining to living beings. I think he's correct on that notion. The fifth proposition, the atom is fully provided with all these foregoing accidents and cannot exist if any be wanting. The meaning of this proposition is this. The Muslims say that each of the atoms created by God must have accidents such as color, smell, motion, or rest, except the accident of quantity, for according to their opinion, an atom has no magnitude. And they do not designate quantity as an accident, nor do they apply to it the laws of accidents. In accordance with this proposition, they do not say when an accident is noticed in a body that it is particular or peculiar to the body as such, but that it is in each of the atoms which form the constituent elements of that body. Example, take a heap of snow. The whiteness does not exist in that heap as a whole, but each atom of the snow is white, and therefore the aggregate of these atoms is likewise white. Similarly, they say that when a body moves, each atom of it moves, and thus the whole body is in motion. Life likewise exists according to their view in each atom of a living body. I think we've learned much more since then that atomic spin goes on, and this is why when it comes to the age of the earth and the universe, you can't, no rational mind can get around the atomic decay rate actual present in the atoms. It's there, and you can't get away from it. You can't say the earth is only 6,000 years old with any degree of intellectual virtue while that atomic decay rate exists. And I've had many a debate on the age of the universe with theologians. The same is the case, according to their opinion, with the senses. In each atom of the aggregate, they notice the faculty of perception. Life, sensation, intellect, and wisdom are considered by them as accidents, like blackness and whiteness, as will be shown in further discussion on the theory. I don't know, some of this gets a little arcane for sure. Concerning the soul, they do not agree. The view most predominant among them is the following. The soul is an accident existing in one of the atoms of which, example, man is composed. The aggregate is called a being endowed with a soul, insofar as it includes that atom. Others are of the opinion that the soul is composed of ethereal atoms, which have a peculiar faculty by virtue of which they constitute the soul, and that these atoms are mixed with atoms of the body. Consequently, they maintain that the soul is an accident. And remember, when he's saying accident, he's not saying it like a car accident, an unexpected. When Hashem breathed into Adam the breath of life and he became a living soul, there was an action, a deliberate action. As to the intellect, I found that all of them agreed in considering it to be an accident joined to one of the atoms, which constitute the whole of the intelligent being. But there is a confusion among them about knowledge. They are uncertain whether it is an accident to each of the atoms which form the knowing aggregate, or whether it belongs only to one atom. Both views can be disproved by a reductio ad absurdum when the following facts are pointed out to them. Generally, metals and stones have a peculiar color which is strongly pronounced, but disappears when they are pulverized. Vitriol, which is intensely green, becomes white dust when pounded. This shows that the accident exists only in the aggregate, not in the atoms. This fact is more striking in the following instance. When parts of a living being are cut off, they cease to live, a proof that the accident of life belongs to the aggregate of the living being, not to each atom. Shalom, Zakiya and Avram, welcome. In order to meet this objection, they say that the accident is of no duration, but is constantly renewed. In discussing the next proposition, I shall explain their view on this subject. Their sixth proposition, the accidents do not exist during two-time atoms. Trying to understand what he's conveying here. The essence of the proposition is this. They believe that Hashem creates a substance and simultaneous its accidents, that the creator is incapable of creating a substance devoid of an accident, for that is impossible. In other words, cause and effect. Think of pool balls on a pool table. The collisions, I think, of what they're talking about when they say accidents. Boom, you bang them together. For that is impossible that the essential characteristic of an accident is its incapability of enduring for two periods, for two-time atoms that immediately after its creation is utterly destroyed, and another accident of the same kind is created. These things make me think of a lot of theoretical physics. There's been over the last 40, 50 years notions that have come to light and then realized as incorrect. And it's just know that this went on 800 plus years ago as well. This again is destroyed, and a third accident of the same kind is created, and so on. So long as Hashem is pleased to preserve in that substance this kind of accident, but he can, at his will, create in the same substance an accident of a different kind. And if he were to discontinue the creation and not produce a new accident, that substance would at once cease to exist. This is one of the opinions held by the Muslims. It has been accepted by most of them, and it is the so-called theory of the creation of the accidents. Some of them, however, and they belong to the sect of the Mutazila, say that there are accidents which endure for a certain period and other accidents which do not endure for two atoms of time. They do not follow a fixed principle in deciding what class of accidents has and what class has not a certain duration. The object of this proposition is to oppose the theory that there exists a natural force from which each body derives its peculiar properties. And I think that modern day physics, thinks opposite of that. They prefer to assume that Hashem himself creates these properties without the intervention of a natural force or of any other agency. Okay. And this is a key point, I think. How does God actually involve himself? Is I think what they're trying to get across is the way Hashem interacts in this world. People try to understand it relevant to the laws of nature. A theory which implies that no accident can have any duration. For suppose that certain accidents could endure for a certain period and then cease to exist. The question would naturally be asked, what is the cause of that non-existence? They would not be satisfied with the reply that God, by his will, brought about this non-existence, and non-existence does not at all require any agents whatsoever. For as soon as the agent leaves off acting, the product of the agent ceases likewise to exist. This is true to some extent, having thus chosen to establish the theory that there does not exist any natural force upon which the existence or non-existence of a thing depends. So he's trying to convey his logic. They were compelled to assume that the properties of things were successively renewed, which I believe is what the Torah, the rabbis teach, is that Hashem breathes life and is constantly creating the universe, and he holds it all together, but more together, is constantly injecting creative juices, if you will, just like a car that runs on gasoline. If it runs out of gas, the car stops. They think of it very similar, but that Hashem, allows that creative force to always be in motion, or everything would just disassemble. When God desires to deprive a thing of its existence, he, according to some of the Muslims, discontinues the creation of its accidents, and ipso, the body ceases to exist. However, others, say that if it pleased the Almighty to destroy the world, he would create the accident of destruction, which would be without any substratum. The destruction of the universe would be the correlative accident to that of existence. And this we've seen, postulated in the notion of the Big Bang. Is it getting to the point where it's going to contract and come back to something they called the Big Crunch, or is it going to continue to expand forever and become the big freeze. Well, there's now some of the greatest physics minds start to postulate the state, and that state in which the Big Bang began, they think might even, the universe will expand to a point where the state is reached, that another Big Bang begins. Who knows when it comes to stuff, when it's theoretical physics, what can you measure, what can you validate, and how is it useful to us? If you can't put it, um, I mean, if you can't use it in any way, what worth is it? And we don't want to be wasting our time in vain. The destruction of the universe would be the correlative action to that of existence. In accordance with this sixth proposition, they say that the cloth, which, according to our belief, we dye red, has not been dyed by us at all, but Hashem created that color in the cloth when it came into contact with the red pigment. We believe that that color to have penetrated into the cloth, but they assert that this is not the case. They say that God generally acts in such a way that, example, the black color is not created unless the cloth is brought into contact with indigo, but this blackness which God creates in the instant when the cloth touches the black pigments is of no duration, and another creation of blackness then takes place. They further say that after the blackness is gone, he does not create a red or green color, but again a black color. According to this principle, the knowledge which we have of certain things today is not the same which we had of them yesterday. That knowledge is gone, and another like it has been created, and also from his point to today. They positively believe that this does take place, knowledge being an accident. In like manner, it would follow that the soul, according to those who believe that it is an accident, is renewed each moment in every animated being, say 100,000 times. For, as you know, time is composed of time atoms, according to them. In accordance with this principle, they assert that when man is perceived to move a pen, it is not he who has really moved it. The motion produced in the pen is an accident which God has created in the pen. The apparent motion of the hand which moves the pen is likewise an accident which God has created in the moving hand. But the creative act of Hashem is performed in such a manner that the motion of the hand and the motion of the pen follow each other closely. But the hand does not act and is not the cause of the pen's motion. For as they say, an accident cannot pass from one thing to another. Some of them accordingly contend that this white cloth, which is colored when put into the vessel filled with indigo, has not been blackened by the indigo, for blackness, being an attribute of indigo, does not pass from one object to another. There does not exist anything to which an action could be ascribed. The real agent is Hashem, and he has, in the foregoing instance, created the blackness in the substance of the cloth when it came into contact with the indigo. For this is the method adopted by him. In short, most of the Muto Kalamim believe that it must never be said that one thing is the cause of another. Some of them who assumed causality were blamed for doing so. As regards, however, the act of man, their opinions are divided. Most of them, especially the sect of the Asha'ariya, assumed that when the pen is set in motion, God has created four accidents, none of which is the cause of any of the rest. They are only related to each other as regards to the time of their coexistence, and have no other relation to each other. The first accident is man's will to move the pen. The second is man's power to do so. The third is the bodily motion itself, i.e., the motion of the hand. And the fourth is the motion of the pen. They believe that when a man has the will to do a thing, and as he believes does it, the will has been created for him, then the power to conform to the will, and lastly, the act itself. The act is not accomplished by the power created in man, for in reality, no act can be ascribed to that power. The Mutazila contend that man acts by virtue of the power which has been created in him. Some of the Asha'ariya assert that the power created in man participates in the act and is connected with it, an opinion which has been rejected by the majority of them, and the will and the power created in man according to the concurrent belief of the mutakalamim, together with the act created in him according to some of them, are accidents without duration. In the instance of the pen, Hashem continually creates one motion after the other. So long as the pen is in motion, it only then ceases to move when Hashem has created it in it the accident of rest. And so long as the pen is at rest, God continually renews in it that accident. Consequently, in every one of these moments, i.e., of the time atoms, Hashem creates some accident in every existing individual. Example, in the angels, in the spheres, and in other things, this creation takes place continually and without interruption. Such is, according to their opinion, the right interpretation of the creed that Hashem is the causa efficiens, but I altogether, with all rational persons, apply to those theories the words, will you mock at him as you mock at man? For their words are indeed nothing but mockery. So I think he's clarified some impropriety with intellectual flaw of his time. And yeah. Anyways, folks, you know what? I'm going to stop right there for today on page 4565 because I have a call coming in the next several minutes from Israel. So I hope that's okay with you. But I will be back tomorrow and continue from this point on. Hopefully, you folks are enjoying it. If you've got some questions or concerns, please text me, write it in the chat box. I'll do my best to get back to you. And we hope that you're blessed with everything you're involved in out there today. Make the world a better place out there. You can do it. Put your knowledge of Hashem to work in all that you do. And may you be blessed in your endeavors. So I'm going to sign out for now, but we'll be back tomorrow with Rocky Mountain Readings, and we will continue with more of the Guide of the Perplexed. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody.